So hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Katie Fettis and I'm with the Canada-Africa Partnership Network. The webinar today is part of the Community for Climate Action North Etobicoke project, which is an initiative that we've been running as part of CAP Network along with the Rexta Women's Centre to take climate action in North Etobicoke. But since a lot of the sessions are virtual, we've been having people coming in from elsewhere. Of course, it's open, right? So we have some guests today from Montreal. We have some guests, I think, from the West Coast. So community gardening is a topic, of course, that's of interest to everybody across the country, it seems like. So we're really looking forward to the session today. So again, welcome. We will maybe get into a bit more about the Community for Climate Action project at the end, but let's get to the topic at hand here. So I trust and I believe that we have many people here today who either are interested to start a community garden or who are already running one and want to come and share some learnings and lessons, or who have some questions about their own operations. So you came to the right place because we've got Anand Lololi today with us to host the session, it's a real pleasure and an honor to have you, Anand, with us to talk about this topic. I think there's nobody better placed to talk about getting community gardens going, especially in cities. There's so many benefits, not just the health and well-being benefits, but the food security, the food sovereignty benefits as well, while providing community engagement opportunities, job opportunities. So let me introduce Anand. Anand Lololi has been at the forefront of championing food justice and food sovereignty for Toronto's African, Caribbean, and Black community since 1995. Mr. Lololi has been working over the last 30 years on the areas of equity, food justice, community food security, social justice, anti-racism, and this includes training, community development, organizing, and running equity and diversity management, community economic development, and youth leadership development programs. So in 1997, Anand founded Canada's first people of color food systems organization, the African Food Basket, and has also been a member of the Toronto Food Policy Council from 2001 till 2009. And so it's a real pleasure, Anand, to have you with us today. And I would love to turn it over to you. Just in terms of how the session's going to run, we'll give Anand a good chance to share what he'd like to share and go through a presentation, which should take about 45 minutes. And then we've got a couple of others with us today, Aubrey and Richard, who will give a chance to share their own experiences after that, as well as Kwame Frempong from the Rexta Women's Centre to talk about his community gardening experience in the Rexdale area. And then we will love to open it up for your questions and comments and discussion after that. So if you have any comments as we go, please use the chat box down at the bottom right or raise your hand using the Zoom function. So welcome everyone, welcome Anand, and please enjoy a great and enriching session today. Over to you, Anand.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and I'm glad to be here with you guys on this Easter Saturday. I'll say about over 50 years ago, I'll be trying to get my kite up on the seawalls on the north coast of the Amazon in Guyana. This is a kite flying time for all those who celebrate Easter. Have a happy Easter. And for all those who don't celebrate Easter, have a nice long weekend. And I'm glad to be here. Community garden animation, as we call it in Toronto, is one of my favorite types of service that I work with at the African Food Basket. I really enjoy doing it in this city of Toronto, this most diverse city in the world. It's a pleasure. I get to see the world in a garden because all these different communities from all over the world, it's been a real blast for me, and I give thanks. I know I don't do a lot these days. I mostly involved in urban farming and food sovereignty work, but it's a pleasure, and I've worked very much in the Rexdale community, especially with young people and community gardening, and it's always a blast working with those young people in the community. So I'm gonna basically talk about how to start a community garden in Toronto. Am I being heard properly? Okay. So
Yep.
we can talk about we can talk about organizing a meeting to find out who's interested in gardening. Um, and we're gonna also go into deciding on the goals for your garden. Uh, think about what you need and what you have. Make a list of for sponsors and source of funding. Choosing a site, asking for approval from whether it be Toronto Community Housing, the City of Toronto, or just a landlord of an apartment building, or it may be in a schoolyard, whichever locale it's in on the site, you ask for permission. I think this is very important for my experience doing garden animation, the rules of your garden. And it's very important, especially in a multicultural city like Toronto. Community gardening is not something that's practiced, I would say, down south, more so in Asia and Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. I'll talk a brief about the history of community gardening so folks could get an idea. Preparing the site, design of the garden, and make sure folks get in touch. So I like to now share my screen. Are we ready with this? I hope I get it right.
Yep. There you go. We're
Oh,
seeing it.
okay. With the sidebar also. Okay, so I would start. How is that, Katie? That's the whole screen? Good.
Great.
How to start a community garden. Okay. Um, this is one of the gardens that we work with in Rexdale, Jamestown Community Garden. It's definitely been a pleasure. Folks who may not know where this is around Jane, this is around Finch and Martin Grove at the back of the community center. And this is a community garden that we work with for a number of years. And also we animated with a lot of young people in the community. When we talk about community garden, it really creates a sense of community while at the same time providing opportunity for individuals or families to garden, whether it be for food or flowers. Well, for my 20 plus years history involving garden animation, it was always food. And it was always intentional in the lower income communities like Jane and Finch, Rexdale, Lawrence Heights, Malvern. We always work in communities that are in need, are more food insecure. And these are one of the gardens. I know this is a more central garden downtown that we work with. And this is just a kind of a snapshot of some of the gardens across the city. As you know, Toronto, there's so many gardens in Toronto, and it's something that I know should be more resource because especially in this time with COVID-19, it's very important that folks grow as much food as they could, especially in their backyards. I will talk also about community gardens, and also I will touch on the COVID-19 protocols that are necessary for gardens, because it's very important, especially in this Northwest Toronto area, one of the most COVID-stricken areas of the city. We want to make sure people garden, but they garden safe. Very important. So hopefully we get a chance to garden the garden season, because you know this COVID-19, they locked down and they closed down and is up and back and forth. So hopefully we get the go ahead to really garden this season, because last year we had some hiccups. We couldn't be involved in the community gardens till the latter part of this, at least late in the season. So some community gardens are communal, where everyone share the work and the harvest. Some have separate individual plots for each garden, and some are a mixture, just like people. Well, again, most of my experience, I would say at least 95% of the gardens that we animate in the city, it's always with individual plots. So folks can have an opportunity to really plant the food they like, and also to work collectively together, managing their own plots, so that they could be able to, they could support their families and friends, but also it could increase their income in the sense that they won't be able to spend money differently that they had to spend on groceries. And also, it will also be able to engage families involved in these plots. So if you look at this plot here, this plot would be more of a communal plot. As you see, it's one long plot and several folks doing the weeding. This is not the norm. This is you hardly see a plot like this in the city, and this is a communal plot, and that's okay. We're right now establishing a communal plot. The African Food Basket, the Black Creek Community Farm. We have a farm site called the Ujama Farm, and we'll be having a communal plot because we're working with a food bank at Jane and Finch called Society for the Living. And we always wanted to make sure we work with a food bank for them to grow fresh, nutritious foods, because a lot of the food banks, the food that they give is a lot of dry food, but it's good to complement it with fruits and vegetables. In this case, we'll be planting more leaf vegetables for them, like Swiss chard, kale, callaloo, pak chai, so that they could have a consistent flow of vegetables to put in um, their food box and the food that they distribute as emergency COVID-19 food to members of the community. But as I said, this is not what you usually see in a community garden. It's usually a garden like this one here. This is a garden tour with some members of the garden. Usually, a number of years ago, we always used to have a garden tour every year. So folks visit this garden. There's a garden on Western Road. It's a Toronto community housing. It was originally a swimming pool that they decided to fill the swimming pool with soil, and we helped them to animate this garden. And when I say animate, the African Food Basket, we come into communities and we help in whatever way to get the garden going. We help communities to organize their meetings, organize resources, and sometimes we are funded. Be able to buy seedlings and buy soil and buy the other amendments that is necessary for gardening. So this is mostly like a community garden variety, whereas individual plots. This is another site that you would see their individual plots. And these gardeners, you would see like the tool shed at the back, and there's probably an area that they also usually have where they could make compost. There's some other gardeners that this was in Lawrence Heights, and this garden was specifically for folks from East Africa, and it was mostly women in this particular garden. The interesting part of animating this garden is that the first day of the garden, the women came as about 15 women, and they came with about 20 kids. We weren't expecting the kids because usually when you have a garden, you got to be careful with seedlings, and they got to be careful kids don't step on the bed. So that was pretty interesting. We had to be able to be creative right away and establish a children's garden on the eastern side of the garden so that they could have their own area. And we had to make sure that we watch over the other parts of the plot so that they won't destroy someone's plot as they plant their particular seedlings. So the benefits of community gardens. Community gardens have lots of benefits. But first, before I get into the benefits, a community garden means many things to many people. For some, a community garden is a place to grow food, flowers, and herbs in the company of friends and neighbors. And I would like to also stress continually, if folks are gardening this season, social distancing is something that must be adhered to, especially in this Northwest Toronto area. So, and community gardens take on many shapes and forms. As you will see, I'll show some examples. So it's very, very important to make sure that as a community garden, people are able to work together. People are able to make sure that they listen to the rules of a garden. I can be talking about that also. So some of the benefits of the garden, as you see, physical exercise, mental relaxation, and stress relief, sense of community and belonging, more affordable produce. And I could say for the residents of Rexdale, this is something definitely as a bonus that it would be good to just come down in the garden and pick as much of your vegetables as possible. As I said, so it could complement your income. So folks will get fresh, affordable, and organic food because these mostly the guidelines that we give out for community gardens that it has to be organic, must be grown organically because families come with the children in the garden. We don't want them to make sure that someone put chemical fertilizer on their plants and some child see something look shine and nice and they pick it and put it in their mouth, and then we have some problems. So the garden rules is that these gardens are grown with organic amendments, whether it be fertilizer or whether it be pesticide. So very important to make sure that we produce food that is sustainable and healthy. And also, when folks grow their own food, they usually increase consumption of fruits and vegetables because they get the opportunity. I grow this, I want to eat it, and they feel proud of their accomplishment, especially folks who never gardened before. It's a big excitement. And then the young children, more so than the adults, are very excited to see these vegetables and sometimes fruits, whether it be strawberries. They get very excited to see from seed to table, and they also consume a lot of fruits and vegetables, especially the vegetables. The folks who are the challenge for coming into gardens are the teenagers. So hopefully we encourage them as much as possible to get into come to the garden so they could help with weeding and also so they could start to grow their own plants. So all folks out there encourage young people to come to the garden so that they could get the opportunity to get a little bit of exercise and mental relaxation because as everyone know, pandemic anxiety, a lot of folks have stress. So the garden would be a good place. But as I said, I'm going to be talking about how we manage the garden COVID-19. So moving along, another important thing, especially about growing food in Toronto, is that we grow food that is familiar. Folks come from so many different parts of the world, and I know Rexdale is definitely a place where the diversity of folks that live, whether it be Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Southern United States, we have lots of folks from all over the world in this community. And what I enjoy most of doing this work is working with these diverse communities and the seeds they bring and the different crops they bring. And I always like to tell folks the food system or the food ways in Ontario was traditionally from folks from Europe. So you would find things like carrots and beets, rutabaga, and these folks that are traditionally from Europe. But because folks coming from all over the world, you would get things like the Bengali bottleneck squash, bitter melon, okra, different varieties of eggplants, different varieties of leaf vegetables like pak chai and bok chai, and all these very delicious vegetables. We get a chance to grow these foods, and we encourage farmers to grow more of these foods in Toronto because we have the diversity. And I'd just like to see Kathy would look at the chat. If folks want to ask questions while I'm going, I'm willing to stop briefly to answer some of these questions as I go through, but I'll definitely take questions at the end. But you could also pose your question in the chat room and I will try my best to answer some of those questions also. So getting on to the real reason for this presentation is planting the seeds and how a community garden grows. Well, a history of community garden is that community garden have been used in the Americas since the 1890s they said the first gardens appearing in places like Detroit. And then during World War One, you had these programs to promote community garden to supplement the expand the domestic food supply. because a lot of the foods that were coming from Europe and other parts of the world, it wasn't possible because of the war. So folks started growing food in these gardens. But even before the 1890s and gardens in Detroit, in transatlantic slavery, during the days of slavery in the United States and even up here in Canada, a lot of slaves were given plots to grow food so that they could supplement the meals that they were getting on plantations. So community garden, it was something that people practiced for a very long time. And now we find we're in 2021. There's still great opportunity to supplement incomes and supplement nutritional value for food grown in your backyard or in community gardens. So as I said before, you have the communal gardens, you have the traditional individual plot gardens, and you have school gardens, and you have church gardens, what we call congregation shared agriculture, where you could use the churchyard and the residents are actually the parishioners were able to grow food collectively together so that they could either distribute to folks attending the church or they could be able to cook in their meal programs. And we work in all these types of programs in Toronto. So one of the first things you would do with establishing a community garden is to organize a meeting of interested people. Most times it's just one person with this brilliant idea that they want to have a garden. They like the idea of a community garden, or they may move from another community and come into a new community and they had a garden plot in that community and they can travel that distance and they have a sense of organizing the garden. So they would start the ball rolling and they would ask for a meeting. If it's at a community housing or if it's an apartment building with a landlord, they would ask for a room to make sure that they could speak with other folks in the building to find out if they're interested in a garden. So they talk about the idea and they listen to the ideas of others and determine if a garden is really needed and wanted and what kind it should be. As I said, most times it's vegetable and all times it's organic. And then they decide who would be involved. What they usually do, they invite folks to the meeting and then they see who's interested. So they know if they need a site for 20 garden beds, 30 garden beds. We even work with gardens with over 100 garden beds. And now that's not usual. Usually we work with gardens with about 20 beds in the garden. And they're usually between 4 feet wide and 12 feet long. And that's usually the size of a garden. But some garden beds are much longer, 20 feet wide by 4 feet. According to what kind of space you get would determine the size of the garden. So a garden meeting would sometimes look like these folks here who would attend the meeting to hear about the garden, what is possible in growing in the garden, and trying to get some feedback from folks involved in this garden. And as I said before, some come for food production, some come for, some get the benefits of nutrition from the garden, exercise, and a sense of community. And they also get a chance for the garden to help reduce the heat island effect in cities and increase biodiversity and reduce rain runoff and dual fossil fuel use from food transport. So as I said, as a program that helped with climate, the climatic conditions right now, it's definitely good for the environment to have community gardens. And also folks get a chance to get educated, even learning how to organize from these meetings that they establish. So this group would start a planning committee so that be able to hear from folks. The planning committee would sometimes have a coordinator, an assistant coordinator, might have a note taker, And if there's any funds that is being allotted for the garden, you have someone who would help to coordinate a fundraising or help to decide where the funds would go and how they would spend the funds. And I think very important, choose a well-organized person as a garden coordinator. To have a garden coordinator, I think it's very, very important from my experience. And I think within this COVID-19 pandemic situation, leadership is very important. So I always advocate for honorarium for a garden coordinator because it's a job. You're organizing a community. And as I said, because we are a multicultural city, you're organizing on a different level. Some folks may not be able to speak English as fluent as possible. That coordinator have to have the patience to be able to communicate with individuals in a way that they're not accustomed to, and they have to be culturally sensitive, so that you could hear someone speaking and respect that the English might not be the best, but you try your best. And I work in gardens where folks sometimes they speak in different language, but they're able to communicate. They don't understand the language, but they're able to communicate in their own way, and they get things done. So the coordinator now has to be a person to lead by example, to be able to delegate work, appreciate the contribution of others, regardless of how large or small the contribution is, welcome and encourage criticism, help people to believe in themselves, articulate and keep the sight of the higher purpose, and avoid doing all the work. Some gardeners are burnt out because they try to do everything. They don't have to do everything. What they have to do is to delegate so that they have a good team. It's going to be a lot of hard work on the individual, and it might jeopardize the smooth running of the garden. So it's very good to pick leadership at a community garden that would determine the ultimate success. So the garden coordinator usually wear many different hats, but their primary role is to help other gardeners find meaningful ways to be involved in the garden and are productive. They might not have to be a horticultural specialist, but they have to be a person who could be a good organizer, because might have a garden specialist in the garden who knows a lot about horticulture. The coordinator would work with that individual to make sure another gardener who doesn't have the skills able to talk with this other person so that the person could get the answers that they're looking for. So it's very important to make sure that there's a job description for the coordinator, so the coordinator have a sense of what the coordinator is doing, and the garden leader take on the responsibility of coordinating meetings and work days. Work days and meetings is something that is very important. I like to stress meetings. If you want to be involved in the garden, you have to make time for meetings, because it's a collective development, and I know folks are working. That's why the coordinator will be able to make sure these meetings are scheduled in a proper way so that all gardeners are able to attend, or most gardeners. Work days. Work days are also important in gardens where all gardeners are involved. All gardeners might not be involved at the same time, but the perimeters of the garden, to keep the garden nice and neat and clean, these are situations where you have a work day. Or it might be you decide to build a tool shed or raise beds. It will be good to get all hands on deck to make sure that what is done in these gardens is collectively. So meetings and work days very important. Making plot assignments by enlisting the help of other garden members so that you can have a fair way of distributing the plots. One of the ways I know we always work with is putting the number of the plots in a bag and do a lottery. So gardeners would be able to pick out their plot by putting their hand in the bag, and whatever number you pull out, that's your plot. So because folks like to run and say, I want my plot next to the gate. I want my plot here next to this person. No, it doesn't work that way. You want it to be transparent So you put all the numbers in a bag, and each individual members come up at the head of the table and they put their hand in the bag, and then they able to take out a number that is which plot they would really be located on. Um, is make sure to have a team on scheduling work days to complete garden projects and maintain the common areas. As I said before, it might be around the compost heap, it might be around the perimeters of the garden, it might be organizing a garden meeting, harvest celebration, whatever is necessary. It might be able to help to write a proposal. It might have for folks with different skills that could help with the running of the garden. Hosting community garden events to involve neighbors with the gardeners. Very important to make sure that invite folks who are not in the garden to attend garden meetings and so that they could understand what's happening in the garden in their community. And also planning winter or off-season activities or meetings. You usually at the end of the season, you put the garden to bed. That means you take out all the trash, whether it be stems and roots, and you clean up the beds so that for the winter season, you have a clean and clear garden so that when you come into the spring, work would not be as tedious as it should if you leave all the stuff in the garden. Very important to seek out funding, developing a garden budget, and make sure that both gardeners are interested and they get to know their neighbors. The other thing too is making the garden accessible to all. Gardens tend to attract a wide variety of people, including those with physical or other challenges. Now, this would be determined by the budget for the garden. Because if folks who are physically challenged need to come in the garden, I mean, you have to do some fundraising so you could have tiles, so you could have clear paths for folks to move around with their wheelchairs or other challenges. And a way of engaging folks who are a physical challenge is building accessible raised beds. For those who use wheelchairs or have trouble bending over is one way to make the garden more accessible, especially for seniors. If seniors involved in the garden, it's good to have raised beds so they don't have to be able to be squatting. They could just bend over slightly and be able to tend to their plants in the garden. Another important piece is to identify all your resources that you need to do a community asset assessment. What skills and resources already exist in the community that can aid in the garden creation? As I said before, you may have someone who previously worked as a horticulturalist, work as a farmer, or the family is a family of farmers, so they know how to grow food, or it might be an extension person who work at a university, or they work in a horticultural society. You make sure you identify that person to make sure it could help with how to grow the food in the best way and also to cultivate healthy soil. Healthy soil is the most important thing that could be in a community garden. So they could practice soil health. Fundraising. They might have some folks who are good at fundraising because there's nothing wrong to get resources to make sure that the garden experience is one where you have a tool shed, where you have tools, okay, we have a good compost site, and also you could actually probably employ someone to be able to help with some of the garden construction and stuff like that that folks in the garden might not be able to facilitate. So you look at all the skills that are available in the garden. You may have a harvest celebration. You may have a chef. You may have folks who could cook particular foods, who could help to organize. You can have someone who is social media savvy, who could help to promote events and also promote the garden so that resources could come to the garden. Contact your local municipal planners about possible sites as well as Horticultural Society and other local sources of information and assistance. In Toronto, there are lots of that. There's Toronto Urban Growers. There's a community garden network. So there's lots of resources that are available. We could make available to you to make sure that you touch base with the relevant folks to be involved. Look within your community for people with experience in landscaping and gardening skills and all the other skills that I just talked about. Very important to approach sponsors, whether it be a bank, whether it be Canadian Tire, whether it be Home Depot, whether it be a supermarket, all these businesses and some governmental nonprofit institutions, they have resources that they could sponsor the garden. So you want to make sure that you do an assessment of all who have businesses in the community. Usually write a letter to them or send an email and you tell them this is what's happening in our community, especially in this COVID pandemic time. There's lots of support because a lot of folks are now working, and having a community garden would definitely be a good resource. But as I said before, we want to make sure we adhere to social distancing and we are doing this garden animation work and work in the garden in a safe environment. Around this time of year is when you want to make sure you start sending out your letters. You don't want to have the garden season start. You want to send out your what you call a beg letter or a sponsorship letter from early to make sure that the resources are available. I know there's the idea of establishing a hoop house in one of these gardens. It's good to make sure that you could start sending out your letters so that either you get it donated or you get some folks to help to set it up. But you do what you got to do. I just see this garden. It was in central Toronto around Pape and Gerrard, the Garden of Eden, and they did a lot of outreach to make sure they get resources for their garden from banks, from Home Depot, from Lee Valley, and home and hardware. So it's to make sure that you can do as much of this as possible. Choose a site. Consider this a month of daily sunshine. Very important to have at least 6 hours a day. So you don't want to put the garden in the shade. You want to make sure you put it where there's most sun. If you could get most sun that could shine on that particular area of the garden, that would be a good thing to do. For who owns the land, can the gardeners get a lease agreement or at least 3 years? Usually it's a site, whether it be city park, whether it be Toronto community housing. You want to make sure you find out when this land, if this land is available to be used, how long it could be used for, because you can put on some structures that you don't want to make sure you put it up this year and you have to take it down the next year. We're talking about like a fencing and stuff like that. You want to make sure that this site have access to water. Very important. If they don't have water, it's going to be a problem. And prepare and develop the site. In most cases, the land will need considerable preparation for planting, organize volunteer work crews to clean it up, gather materials, and decide on the design and the plot arrangements. So all of these ideas and activities to be done would be coordinated by meetings. When the coordinator call meetings, you folks need to be available, especially this time of the year. When the season get going, it's meetings are far and near because everyone is up and running, but they still have to meet in the season. But in the beginning, like this time of year, late winter, early spring is when there's lots of meeting. Probably sometimes you meet every week. You want to have a successful garden, it needs successful organizing. This is one of the most simple and basic garden layout. We always usually start with this design, so folks don't have a lot to worry about. And usually, as I said, because we work in gardens where in communities that don't have a lot of resource, is not usually raised beds, but the plots and the plots is on the ground, and you just garden. You have as you see here, you have the plot, and you have a pot, plot, pot, and you have you could able to have a part at the side and a central part, and then you have the gate. Sometimes the 2 gates. You have this one, and then you have another one, so that it could be accessible to the community compost or a tool shed. And this would probably more likely be the tool shed. And very important to have that and have it that's secured. When there's more money available now, you'll have a community garden that looks something like this, and you get a landscape, somebody to do a real garden site plan where you could see how you want the garden. It mightn't be this organized at first, but at least it would give you something to start working to. So you can have smaller plots, you can have larger plots, you can have raised beds, you can have a community garden picnic area, and you have your compost area, your tool shed. You have areas if you want to expand. You could also have an area that if you want to grow like an orchid and grow some fruit trees. I think in areas like Rexdale, Toronto Region Conservation Authority should make these gardens available. And I think speaking to Kofi and showing where they wanted a garden, I think this is what a garden should look like in that particular area, to be expanded, so folks could have access to these large plots, and they could definitely be available to community members and work with TRCA and get the relevant resources to make sure these gardens are realized. I just brought this up because I was working in partnership with this group in Parkdale in Toronto. I just see this original site that they have, that they're using as a community garden with the individual plots, and this is a architect design that they would like to make sure that in the near future, this is what this would look like, this and look like this. These two are the same. It's very important so folks could see and start fundraising. So you have a nice fence, you have a gate, you have a little, I would say like a little housing area that could probably have the tools and meetings. And then you have your hoop house that you could use for growing your own seedlings. Organize a garden. Members must decide how many plots are available and how they would be assigned. As I said before, it's usually the lottery. Allow space for storing tools, making compost, and don't forget the pathway between plots. And also, it's good to remember the children, and you have space, maybe a children's garden, so they could do their own thing. Plant flowers or shrubs around the gardens, edge to promote goodwill with the non-garden neighbors, passerbys, and municipal authorities. Sometimes folks put a lot of jing bang, a lot of stuff in the garden, a lot of unsightly stuff, whether it be a bed spring, and it's good to have the resources to make sure the garden looks good, so that it could encourage people to donate, it can encourage people to be more involved in the garden. And so getting the resources to have the right infrastructure for inside the garden is critical, so that when folks look at the garden, they can feel proud, and then they look and they can see some good long beans or bitter melon or squash growing, and something that is very sightly, but also could contribute to the aesthetics of the garden. Plan for children. Consider creating a special garden just for kids, including them, is essential. Children are not interested in the size of the harvest, but rather in the process of gardening. A separate area set aside for them allows them to explore the garden on their own. Children at this age, when they see food growing in the garden, it's like magic, especially if they grow up in an apartment building and they never had the opportunity to go to a farm. They don't have a clue where food come from. You ask them where food come from, they say McDonald's and Harvey's. So when they see food growing in a garden, they get very, very excited. You want to make sure that they get the opportunity to have their own plots, and also that they could see how food is being grown. This garden here is some children. We always encourage them to come to help with cleaning. This is in the Rexdale community garden. And I think one of the most important things for a garden is garden rules. This is very, very critical. You must have a set of garden guidelines or garden rules. Some people don't like to see rules, or rules said, it tends to have a sense of, folks, throwing their weight around. But as I said before, gardening is not something that folks who come from Africa and Asia and Latin America, in these places, folks grow food anywhere possible, the side of a train track, the side of the highway, whatever, because growing food is not so much of a luxury as it is in Canada. Growing food is a survival in some of these countries. So people grow food anyway, but in a city like Toronto, you cannot grow food anyway. And so you get the opportunity to grow food, whether it be at the side of apartment building or the back of a school or a community center or in a park. You want to make sure you have rules so that folks could respect each other and their diversity and cultural values. Very important. I always stress in the gardens, you make sure folks sign off on the garden rules. You want to be respectful, treat others and their plants how you would like to be treated. Keep our garden beautiful, pick up trash, pull weeds, and trim vining and plants. A good example is that you don't want to be growing all corn in the middle of the garden because it would place a shadow. There won't be enough lights for the other person plot next to you. So we need to be able to be careful when we locating different aspects of growing the food in gardens and what we grow. Share the bounty, share extra produce with friends, neighbors, or fellowship or other folks. Enjoy the sunshine, make new friends, share garden knowledge, and enjoy fresh foods. I got so much stories I could tell about people in gardens and being in a community and never speaking to no one for like 15 years, and you live next to them, and then you have a community garden and you become best friends. So it's a beautiful experience. This is a more comprehensive experience of a garden guidelines. It's from the American Community Garden Association. I always like to use this because it have lots more information that is necessary for growing food in a community garden. As I said, most of these gardens in Toronto, people don't pay a fee. It's free of cost. You sign up, you're on a waiting list, and when your name come up, you get a chance to garden. Gardeners usually sign off on this so that they could be accountable for what the rules and the guidelines of the garden say. And then, you have to have your garden celebration. Garden celebration is critical to make sure that we enjoy the fruits of our labor. Community gardens succeed. You might invite the councillor or the head of the Toronto Community Housing or whoever to these garden celebrations so they could see the success of the garden and how it is impacting the residents to come to the garden and celebrate the harvest and also honor the gardener's success. COVID-19 guidelines. I'm just about to finish. I want to run through this, but I think this is a very, very important aspect of now, especially in Northwest Toronto. We have to adhere to COVID-19 guidance for community gardens, infection prevention and control measures to help reduce the risk of COVID-19. People are dying, people are getting sick. We want to make sure we garden in the safest of ways. So these are some of the information coming from the Toronto Public Health COVID-19 facts. Reduce risk of transmission, stay at home when you are ill, practice physical distancing and maintain a 2 meter, 6 feet distance from others when at the garden. Respect the provincial emergency order that permits social gathering of more than 5 people when at the garden. We always have to listen to the radio to make sure we know how things are changing in relation to the community distancing, where we could go, what we could do, because we want to make sure folks adhere to these principles. Hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. Prior to entering exiting the garden, every person must wash their hands with soap and warm water before at least 15 seconds. If warm water is not available, wash your hands with cold water and soap and then apply hand sanitizer. Folks have to take these things serious in a community garden. If hands are visibly soiled, hand washing with soap and water is preferred. If soap and water are not available, hands must be wiped clean before applying an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Cover your cough or sneeze into tissue. Immediately throw the tissue in the garbage and wash your hands. Declaration from garden manager and garden members. Each garden manager and garden member must sign the Toronto Public Health Community and Allotment Garden Declaration, which states that garden managers and members must adhere to the interim directions as put forward by the city. Signed and dated declarations for all members of community garden must be kept by community garden coordinator and must be made available to Toronto Public Health upon request in order to investigate a positive case of COVID-19 should one be detected. Signed and dated declarations are required before a garden member can participate in any community garden in order to prevent the spread of infection. Very important. Self-screening. Every person visiting a garden must complete the self-assessment for COVID-19 on the Ontario Ministry of Health website. If they do not pass the assessment, they should not participate in community gardening until they pass the assessment and don't have the symptoms of COVID-19. Gardeners can visit the city website to determine if further care is required, and this could be the work of the garden coordinator to direct gardeners where they need to go to find these particular documents. I could make this information available to anyone who need to get this information. All garden members and managers should be aware of the symptoms of COVID-19, including fever, cough, difficult breathing, muscle aches and tiredness, sore throat, headache, runny nose, new loss or taste of smell. That's why I say it's very important that the garden coordinator in this time be a person who should get paid to do this work. This is much more than the ordinary garden coordination. This is making sure COVID-19 protocol are adhered to, and it's life and death. It's very important these COVID-19 facts available to folks so that we have a safe gardening experience if and when they said community gardening activity is available. Entrance self screening, then entrance restriction. Anyone who's exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19 or has close contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19 cannot enter community garden. No visitors are permitted to community garden in this time. Only gardeners are permitted in the garden at this time. No friends and family, and because we're in a particular kind of season for gardening. We in a particular time of year. For this last year, folks have seen what's going on, and I must stress again, Northwest Toronto is a place where lots of people are infected with COVID-19, and we should know that, and we should make sure that we mitigate so that they don't have as much folks involved. And if one or two folks are involved in the garden with COVID-19, could be a problem with the garden, could be closed down. So we definitely need to have special meetings to talk about the COVID-19 fact sheets for community gardening. Record keeping. Each community garden and allotment garden must maintain a sign-in and sign-out system to track who is in the garden each day. This will assist with contact tracing if required. If someone developed COVID-19, the record needs to include full name of person who visited the garden and contact information. I know this might be tedious. It's life and death. So it's good to be tedious and stay alive, and also other persons in the garden could stay alive. So as I said, that's why the garden coordinator to do this work should be somebody who get compensated, because this is not no easy job. And that person putting themselves on the line, and that person have to exhibit leadership, wearing their mask, distancing, speaking to folks. You're too close. They have to be the community garden police. So they police who is out of order. And folks are out of order. You have a meeting. If this person have to be banned from the garden, so be it. This is not normal gardening times where you can say 2 and 3 times and the third time. This is the first time, second time, you're out. You want to make sure that we have a safe gardening season. I'm going over a little bit, but just want to make sure that we get this piece in for sure. Record keeping, the full name, who visited the garden, date and time of the person when they visit the garden. So these are the public health guidelines that we want to make sure that folks adhere to so that we have a safe gardening season. Cleaning and disinfecting requirements. Truly clean and disinfect high traffic areas and frequently touched surfaces and objects. For example, the entrance, exit, tool sheds, water spigots and hoses, waste containers, and common areas. Now, these are things that we just do, and we just do it, and we don't take any seriousness because we're accustomed doing it. But for now, we have to think about these cleaning and disinfecting requirements. So gardening this year is a much more challenging than usual. So folks who want to garden have to make sure that they maintain these protocols as part of the garden rules and guidelines. High-touch surfaces and items in common areas must be cleaned and disinfected after use. In general, regular household cleaners such as bleach or alcohol-based solutions are acceptable. Review Public Health Ontario cleaning and disinfection for public settings documents. As I said, all this information could be available to the garden coordinators so they could read off this information to gardeners. We in a different time, we have to have different rules. Equipment and tool requirements. Avoid sharing tools and equipment if possible. One of the most used tools in the garden is usually a hand shovel. When you're planting seedlings, when you're weeding, that need to be personal. So every person in the garden should have these personal tools this year. So if there's any funding, Kathy, make sure that we involve in a particular garden, make sure that these folks get their own personal tools and their own gloves and their own pads when they're kneeling so that they won't have to share tools. Because if you share tools, disinfect after each use. Now, folks won't feel, oh, I just use this. Best thing to do is just give them their own. Some people might be so stressed they don't remember the rules. It's best they have their own. Do not share gardening gloves. Gardening gloves should be laundered after each use. Gardening gloves are recommended as a way to maintain good hand hygiene while gardening. Required signage: post the physical distancing poster, how to protect yourself poster at all garden entrances and at common areas such as the tool shed and the hose area. Communication: community garden manager must provide information to garden members to ensure they're all familiar with the symptoms of COVID-19. Create a schedule to minimize crowding at the garden. Maintain an up-to-date list of members, including contact information. Communicate with members frequently about these guidelines. Communications is critical. Gardeners who will become ill while at the garden, people who become ill with COVID-19 symptoms while at the garden should go home immediately in a private vehicle if possible and self-isolate. They should also review the City of Toronto website for more information about COVID-19. If a garden member or coordinator tests positive for COVID-19, Toronto Public will follow up with close contacts who may include other garden members. Other garden members who come in close contact with the infected member may also be required to self-isolate. For more information, www.toronto.ca/COVID-19, and there's a phone number I could put. You could get this information to call in any case. Just about finished. Physical distancing sign, community garden closed, or you could have the community garden COVID-19 guidelines printed up so that folks could have it and they could see it every time they come to the garden to remind them that this is critical. You must adhere to these COVID protocols as garden guidelines. Very, very important. This is the sheet I wanted to make sure folks see it, that they have to sign Toronto Public Health Community Allotment Garden Declaration. I hereby declare that I've read and understand the Toronto Public Health directions for participating in community gardens and allotment gardens. I understand what my responsibility are and I will adhere to the guidelines. This is very important. Garden members who are part of a community garden must submit the completed declaration to the community garden manager, community garden coordinator, so that all folks could be covered and that they sign the declaration. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share this experience with you. Thank you so much.
Wow, Anand, thank you too. I believe that is extremely practical information. You didn't just walk us through why you want to start a community garden, but exactly how, right from the first step through to the last step. And thank you too for that COVID-19, for walking us through that in detail, because I believe you've been continuing, through the past year, gardening and finding a way to do it safely. So yeah. I think a lot of people are wondering, can we continue at all in this time, or do we just need to wait until this is over? But like you've said, it's an important time to be able to keep growing food, fresh food, especially in Northwest Toronto. And so finding a way to do it safely is very helpful. Thank you
Yes,
for that.
yes.
Uh,
I think it's very important that we adhere to the protocol and that we grow food, because it's best to grow the food and go to the supermarket. I think if we're looking at safety, we stand a better chance in our community garden or as a backyard and a town home. So yes, we should make sure as supporting animators community, we support them in as much as possible to make sure that they garden and garden safe.
Absolutely. And thank you for the detail. I know you said you can provide that for anybody who needs it
Yes.
to the template. Thank you very much. So we want to take a couple of questions now. We have one, uh, and then I have a couple of others, but let's see if others have any, and then we'll go to our next guests. But the first question is about the African food basket. So question from Hannah, particularly about funding. So where does African Food Basket get most of your funding from? You've been working for years and years in the city on some of these topics. How, where does your funding come from?
Well,
The second question is about COVID-19. I believe you've answered some of that, but how has COVID-19 affected your operation in practice?
first thing about the African food basket, since we started in 1995, for nonprofit organizations, there's always funding as resources if you're offering social services within communities, whether it be mental health, whether it be youth development, whether it be rape crisis, whether it be for battered women, environment. There's always resources from foundations, from the city of Toronto, from the provincial government, from the federal government. As long as you're doing the service as a non-governmental, you're doing the work that the government's supposed to be doing, but you're doing it on a communal basis, there's funds that are available, whether it be Trillium Foundation, Laidlaw Foundation. So there are lots of opportunity out there. You organize yourself as a non-governmental organization and you start doing this work. For a community garden, you could also be as a non-governmental organization, organize yourself. Because community gardens are so transient and people leave and come back. But if folks are serious and they live in that area, you could also organize around that level and you could have access to funding to support your garden. As I said, you could do crowdfunding now. There's all these new areas of accessing funding right now. You could also go and speak to banks. You make your case, you're representing communities, you have your little community newsletter. So folks know that you're involved in something that is legit and that you're transparent. You have your community organized, where you're treasurer of the community garden, the secretary, and you organize yourself and funding will be made available. Last year, we were adhering to these protocols to the best of our ability. If you come to the farm at Black Creek or Jane and Steels, you would see that we have signs around the garden. And also, they were always calling me, I'm the COVID-19 police, because you have to police it. People sometimes take it for granted. You have to tell them, no, you have to have your mask, else you can't come in. You have to have social distancing. You cannot weed together. So that's why I said the person who's going to be the coordinator is going to have a lot of work this year. So we always make sure we adhere to the protocols as set up by Toronto Public Health.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A question that a lot of people are always asking when they're thinking about starting a community garden is where can they find the land, especially in the city? What's the best approach for that? Maybe if you live in an apartment building, you can approach your property manager.
Yes.
But when we look at small parks in the city, can you approach the city and say, can we start a
Yes.
community park?
Yes.
What's the best way to find the land?
I would say the best way to find the land, the two most accessible places is the City of Toronto Parks and Rec, and also Toronto Community Housing. These two areas, these two institutions are places that you could go and you could have access to most land. Also, as you know, Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, there are big challenges with them. They sometimes ask for much more when you actually use the land that they are showed in. But for sure, the city and Toronto Community Housing, and then it may be individual business landlords who own apartment buildings. So you want to make sure when you start organizing, you suss them out to make sure that you could speak to them and they would be able to help you in ways that could show the guidelines of what you have to do, because you have to adhere to their way of doing what they have to do so that they could be safe, liabilities and stuff like that. They want to make sure that you have what it takes to manage the garden properly.
Yeah, it's all about building a partnership.
Yeah.
Building a partnership. Final question. I heard you say during the presentation, the healthy soil is one of the most important things that you can have in a community garden. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you mean we need to have soil health as the foundation of the community garden, and how can we make sure we build it, especially with people
Well,
coming and going?
I get to understand soil health is the most important. You want to have healthy soil. That means you want to make sure of a community garden, you have organic soil if, as much as possible. Soil could be expensive, but it's a good resource of investment in the community garden. For instance, like if for instance you have beds and you cover the bed, most of the bed, with you get enough compost. 1 or 2 years it's good, but you always want to make sure you keep amending. It's like anything else. You want to make sure you keep the soil healthy. You always improve it by putting in compost, or we could use what you call green manure. For instance, if you know, like around September, October, you could plant you could be able to amend the soil by using green manure and using different types of seeds, and you could till it back into the soil. You want to make sure you always keep the soil as healthy as possible. For me, it produces best when the soil is healthy. I mean, it's not depleted of all the necessary nutrients. That's why you don't want to put chemical fertilizer, because they kill the organisms in the soil that really help to produce a more healthy soil. So you keep feeding the soil with healthy food, and you're going to get more healthy food, and you're going to get a good yield when you grow food.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Comment from somebody who's doing a food insecurity research in Toronto at college, and says, you've given such a crucial community-driven initiative to enhance food sovereignty. Is it possible to have your contact information so we can
Yes,
follow up?
if you go to the top of this chat, you can see my email and my name, and yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Great, Natsuki. Okay, let's see any more questions here. Just a thank you. Thank you from Natsuki. So just keeping things moving along here, I think I want to introduce Kwame, because Kwame is working in the Rexdale neighborhood, especially on a community gardening initiative that's been going on for a number of years now. And Kwame, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the garden, how it got started, whether, you know, the roadmap that Anand laid out is something that's worked for you, maybe some of your learnings, how you're planning to go about it this year in this context of COVID-19. Kwame, welcome.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you. I would say Professor Anand Lololi. Please give me the opportunity to address you by the title Professor. It's not quite the most exciting time when you are a student, let me put myself in that bracket, and you are asked to speak on the same topic as a professor. I think I would advise anyone not to take that road.
Thanks, Kwame.
For me to speak after my professor, all I was doing is to making notes and canceling everything that I wanted to say. So I was canceling and canceling. And I said, okay, maybe I need to exit this platform and make an excuse, because then my presentation will be boring. Why? Because almost everything that Professor Anand has said is basically what I'm going to be touching on. And so quickly for me, I had to put on this screen, at least to give a different, more or less the same trajectory, but for the viewers or for the participants, an idea of how far we have come beyond just community garden. And I think this is a road, the screen you've seen is something that Professor Hanan himself has encouraged our team, that is the most difficult part of community garden, which is community composting. And that is a road that we decided to take. We wanted to take the difficult road so that when we're speaking, we can speak with confidence and with some level of experience. So my name is Kwame Nanifempo, and I'm with the Rextel Women's Center. And we, Rextel Women's Center, we are administering the Community Reduce and Reuse Program, which is an initiative of the City of Toronto Waste Management. The community garden is part of our project. So what I mean is that we have other program areas that we focusing on, like the You Fix It program, which is working with residents to fix their electronic appliances for free and toys. The idea is to limit the amount of items that ends up in a landfill. We also have the 3 hours, the Reduce, Reuse, and Recycle Animator program, where we recruit and appoint animators who will kind of represent the Community Reduce and Reuse program in their respective apartment building. The project is situated at 2677 Kipling Avenue. So the community, Kipling Towers Community Garden, as is the name, is actually owned by the Kipling 2677. That's a twin building. The tenant association, they manage the community garden, and the CRP, which is administered by the Rextel Women's Center, we offer some technical expertise and some oversight of the program. As you know, most of the gardeners, including the garden coordinator herself, they are all full-time, busy. And so sometimes it's very difficult to kind of coordinate garden activities and their own personal and professional work. So our presence on the project is to give it that extra push to support the process. For example, as you can see on your screen, this is one of our partnership projects with the Food Share, where food items that actually technically should have ended up in a garbage, they brought it to the site for us to work on the composting. The garden has 12 beds, and as Professor Lolo said, it's 12 feet long and 4 feet wide. I think we picked the model. And also, Professor Lolo, let me quote you. You said something about the world in one garden. That is very true. I can tell you that this garden has gardeners from different backgrounds, and it's very diverse and very multicultural. And that's a reflection of the type of crops and vegetables that they grow there, from different countries. Some of the gardeners themselves from their country of origin, as in where they came from before migrating to Canada, they were farmers. So they take the garden very serious, because that is the only thing that kind of gives them that sense of belongings in settling down in their newfound environment. So for them, it's not just the harvesting of the crops, but also helping them to settle there, especially during this COVID period. Last year, when the city gave the green light for community gardens to operate, it was a difficult time. It was a difficult time because, sorry, it was a difficult time. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Let me take off. It's Saturday, so let me take off my little boy.
Yeah, of course, family duties.
Okay, so on and on, we've had this program going, and almost everything that Professor Anand said is something that we have been working on. I quickly put out some links. Let me see if I can put it on the screen, at least to demonstrate Let me see. 1 second. All right, let me go back and let me pick it from here. Open the hyperlink. Okay, so this is Laurel. Laurel, she's the coordinator. She's the garden coordinator, and Laurel has been very active. As you can see, this was last year, and it's on our social media, Instagram login. We post almost activities that happens in the garden as a way to kind of showcase what is being taking place. So if you visit our Instagram page, CRRP__RWC, you have to kind of follow suit on the activities in the garden. Let me also quickly put this thing there. Open hyperlink. 1 second. Okay, so this is the garden. As you can see, the picture was taken at a very far distance, so you can see the 12 beds. This is where it is in the location of the garden behind the apartment building of 2667, 2677. As you can see some chairs over there. Like I said, the gardeners, that is their home. That is where they find solace, and so they make sure that when they go to the garden, the place is well kept, so on and so forth. And again, due to COVID, the social distancing, everything else that, like I said, Professor Nat has said, and including some that we've not, to be honest with you, some that we've not been doing. I think I've taken note of that, and then during the next garden coordinators meeting and then gardeners meeting, I will bring that up for discussion. So let me quickly also pick a. So this is actually the garden. As you can see, we took a short video, and all these things, like I said, is on our social media, Instagram account. So when you visit, you have the opportunity to see it yourself. Let me do some few more slides before I conclude. As you can see, this is pepper. I think I have some very interesting one that talks about the youth in the community garden. These are all from the gardens. We put it on our Instagram page, and again from the garden. So everything else we put it on our social media page. At least you can have an experience. Some short videos that we make. Also on our Instagram page. And let me see. Go here. Okay, back to the composting. Our compost is ready. I think I invited Katie the last time Katie came on site. We have the composting, and I think I also invited Professor Anand, and he was telling me that one of the most difficult thing to do is the community composting, and we have been able to do that. So when Professor spoke about soil healthy and using organic compost, that is what we are using this year for our garden. And I can tell you, it's not an easy job. Katie will testify to that. It's not an easy job to have it, but like I said, we took the difficult road, and so we have a good story to share. Let me see this last open link. Okay, so this is just about that. This is just a brief of the presentation that I want to share with you, at least as a confirmation of our involvement and participation in the community garden. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kwame. Yeah, it's a great example, and I can testify that the composting is not easy, and that takes hours of work and hard work too. So well done, great work there. Keep it up. And hopefully when it's safe, then all of you will have a chance to come by and see it in person so that you can get ideas if you too are thinking about starting your own community garden. In our last few minutes here, I want to turn it over to our next guests. We have Richard and Aubrey with us. I know, Richard, you have to go shortly, so let's have you on first. Or both of you maybe will share the stage. So welcome, Richard and Aubrey. I think some examples from outside of Toronto so that we can see how they compare. So welcome, over to you guys. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. And I really love the presentations that we've heard, you know. You know, what we're doing, what I've been doing all my life is focused on growing food year round. So, you know, it's kind of a Nordic thing, right? It's a Canadian thing. Well, we have a long winter, so can we use a more efficient greenhouse? And that's what I put my life into, is inventing greenhouse technology that's a low energy. And so I did my research on this in the 80s, early 90s. I did some large-scale implementations in Canada and the US. And then I went over to England in 2000, and we did more development. And the last place where I've really done my work is in Norway. And so now we have quite a bit of northern communities. We have Norway, Iceland, and projects in Canada. And one of them, which is being considered for my technology, is in Owen Sound, which is, you know, a bit further north than Toronto, not that much, but, and also Aubrey, my collaborator and partner, is in British Columbia.
Yeah.
And Aubrey, you're here too, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So, you know, I'll kick it off maybe, and then Aubrey can follow up with more like the practical things that we're doing. Okay, so what we want to equip people to garden in their backyard and in the schoolyard and in the community, the farms, year round. And so, as I say, it comes down to a year-round climate-controlled environment. And within the environment, we want to grow organically. So it's very important to know that, you know, we appreciate the soil health, we appreciate the same issues, you know, we want to work with nature, we want to work with natural sunlight, okay? So a lot of times you'll see some of these, you know, food factories, you know, you see them sometimes getting attention, and they want to grow plants with lamps, right? Instead of, well, in the dark with lamps. Well, I don't think that's a very good idea, really. I think we need to grow our food with natural sunlight. So, but to do that, you have to not have the heating and cooling cost, right? Because when we grow indoors, even with sunlight, it takes a lot of energy. And that's why, you know, we have the issues about how do you operate a greenhouse and over the winter season, and can we afford to grow food this way? Because of the heating cost in Canada, and then in many places in the world, cooling cost, you know, because these environments overheat as well. So anyway, let me show the video for the concept for a village. And my technology is called solar roof. So when you see the solar roof village is a conceptual for a village. Here we go. Mm-hmm. There is a soundtrack. Okay, I'm not hearing sound.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Solar Roof, a vision for ecological living. An open source gift to the world for a massively transformative purpose to fix the climate with no family left behind. Healing people with good, local, secure food. Healing the planet by building a new relationship with nature. Let's imagine what this would look like. Food that is local, fresh, regenerative, organic, and abundant. takes water collected and conserves and reuses it as irrigation water, feeding regenerative food production. Solar energy and biogas converted for carbon-free heating, cooling, transportation, food, and water production. Bio-oil from algae for transportation fuel and seasonal energy storage. A solo roof building is an effective climate change adaptation that is secure and sustainable. Residents are secure within a clean, closed atmosphere environment and protected from smoke, smog, pollution, wildfires, drought, chemical, and biological threats. People are secure from extreme heat and cold, and our construction system safeguards the impact from hurricanes, earthquakes, and violent weather. CO2 mitigation is accomplished through sequestering of carbon in vegetables and fruit grown in a high concentrate environment. Regenerative practices and efficiencies further reduce CO2 across the food, water, energy, and building operations sectors. These methodologies, if universally adopted, would cumulatively allow these solar roof villages to mitigate global warming. The Earthshot not only cares for humanity, but also assures the recovery of planetary ecosystems and biodiversity by consolidating the human footprint to a small area, allowing the land to regenerate. Solar Roof is a new ecological architecture providing optimal human habitation and allowing the restoration of the land biome with no family left behind.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, this is a community scale project, and the group that's considering this is in Owen Sound called Glassworks Co-op, glassworks.coop for their website. And well, they have a large number of people, I would say maybe most of them in Owen Sound, but a lot of them also in Toronto and other parts of Ontario, and some people outside of Ontario, I would say as well, who have joined that effort. But we're also very interested to bring the technology to the backyard, which would be quite small scale use. And maybe, well, Aubrey, maybe you could jump in and
Yeah.
We can, you know, maybe we start with that video about
Yes.
bubble.
Yeah, bubble fun.
This is showing the technology, what we call bubble tech, and soap suds are used for insulating in the roof system.
Oh, this one.
Mm-hmm.
No sound. Yeah, sure. Yeah, there.
Solar energy is quite different than the typical approach. It involves treating the greenhouse itself as a collector. So what we want to do is let the sunlight in and then capture this energy and then conserve it inside the greenhouse. So what we've done is we've created the entire roof as an active collector. The system of generating a blanket of insulating bubbles, that's quite original.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This one shows the smallest greenhouse we designed. Yeah. Just the idea is to be able to grow your own food in the backyard. I started that way. I got my hand injured while I worked for a solar company, but then I thought about what I should do to grow my own food, right? At that time it was winter time, so I started aquaponics. I use a corner of the house, I mean inside, right? Because it was winter. And then I started to aquaponics. I know aquaponics works. And then how do I do in wintertime, right? So that's why I explored the greenhouse, and that's how I got connected to Richard Nelson. And he had this invention, more than 40 years ago, 48 years ago. So, and I find out, it's a such a wonderful thing, just use bubbles. Okay, so that video explained the bubbles, right? The fun part, but also the how you can use bubbles, to create the shade during the summertime, but also to create the insulation you need, right? The bubbles can fix the air in the little tiny bubbles, right? So that they stop the heat loss, right? So basically, the idea is to have to build a greenhouse that is double layer, right? And then fill the double layer cavity with soap bubbles. So the in winter time, it during the day it collects solar thermal energy, and but also you during the night you insulate the whole canopy, so to store the collected solar energy. So that's the idea. And then we can prove that the sun is enough. It's just enough. You can collect the solar thermal energy and to be used during the night. So that's the idea. And that's so we design a full line of products, starting from small, that for those who want to start their food growing from their backyard, or even bigger ones, for community, right? We have one design, it's called city pot, to be able to even grow food for the whole city. Yeah, this flat roof design. But anyway, when they all bear the same principle, using the same principle, that is double layer cavity, and that is fully open to the sun, but at the same time insulate when you need it. I mean, producing bubbles, right? And also create shading when you in the hot summertime, you don't want your food to be burned, right, by too much sun, right? So anyway, so the idea is to use solar thermal energy, and collect it and to store it, and so that even at nighttime, it stay relatively warm. So the traditional traditional greenhouse, the problem is always like this. Whenever you build something like that, and it's hot in the summertime and cold in winter, right? So what we do is to simply reverse it, make it cool during the summertime, and make it warm during the winter time. So that's the magic about
Shit.
bubbles. Yeah. So anyway,
Oh.
so that's explained. And then any questions? I heard someone trying to.
Oh, there we go. I'm back. What I
Okay.
lost.
Yeah.
I'm able to stay a little bit longer, actually.
Okay.
I was
good.
checking with the other video conference. And
That's great. Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks, Richard, and thank you, Aubrey, for sharing. That's very interesting and inspiring work to see all the different ways that you can grow food, especially for most of us who are in the city and maybe a different space, we can just
Yeah.
start doing some. That's great. I know we're going a little bit over time here. So what I want to do now is just to introduce Tamar from the Akai team, just to share a little bit about what else is coming up and what this workshop is all part of, as well as to bring Mr. Anon, of course, Professor Anon, and then for anybody who has time after that, we can stay for a few more minutes and have some discussion and questions for all of our guests. So, but for now, go ahead, Tamar, if you're there.
I am here. Katie. All right, great. So what can I say? You know, it was indeed a very informative session. And I started out, you know, in terms of community gardening. Community gardening is something that, you know, we should all be comfortable doing. You know, in this age and stage of a COVID lockdown, you find that person sometimes are just generally unwilling to go on the road. And so what can you do irrespective of the space that you operate? And I like the fact that, you know, he brought out several ideas in terms of, you know, methodologies that can be used. And for that, you know, I really have to commend him for that as well. Also, the COVID requirement, etc., and the protocols that must be followed were clearly stated. And so I really want to thank Anand for that. Richard as well, Richard and Aubrey. I mean, the ideas that you two gentlemen have put forward, they are fantastic, you know, and look at it. Some of these very same procedures were things that were developed several years ago, you know, the concept, simple things that you can use. And so, you know, I am very optimistic in terms of the future and what we can do in terms of sustainable development, in terms of sustainable farming, in terms of community gardening. And so at the end of the day, I think we are really heading in the right direction. So thank you for that. What I am going to be doing, I have posted in the chat forum the survey that I'm going to be asking the participant to complete. It is important as part of our monitoring and evaluation processes. And so once you complete the survey, then we would do our necessary analysis as well as to inform the presenters in terms of, you know, ways and means in which we could actually improve the training. Separate and apart from that, you know, it forms part of our monitoring and evaluation processes at the Africa Climate Action Initiative. And so therefore we are seeking your support in completing the survey. In addition to that, we are also giving away some trees, yes. There are some trees to give away, and so therefore for you to, well, a critical requirement is that you have to complete a survey or a form of interest, and then we will review it and we will reach back out to you. So, you know, we don't have trees indefinitely. We have a specific number of trees. And so therefore, it is important that you complete the application for us to consider you. So I'm going to ask that you complete that as well. Now, in terms of our training, we have a number of other sessions coming up, and let me just brief you, you know, in terms of what those sessions are. So today you would have been introduced to the Africa Food Basket. And so on April 5th, we have another session in terms of how we can build a better food system, and the focus is food security. On the 6th of April, we will have the Rexdale Women's Center, where they are going to be focusing on weight diversity and education. On April 12th, we have Climate Fast. They will continue with their kitchen table conversation, and the focus is going to be on collective courage. On 13th of April, we will have the Africa Food Basket, where we are going to be looking at balcony gardening. So we would have focused on community gardening, then we are going to take it now to balcony gardening, because in truth and in fact, there are some persons who don't have access to community space. And so you live in an apartment or you might live in a townhouse. And so therefore, what can you do with the balcony that you have? And so they are going to be focusing on balcony gardening on the 13th of April. On the 15th of April, Africa Climate Action Initiative, ACAI, we are going to be having our first kitchen table conversation, and so we're inviting you to be a part of that. On the 19th of April, we will have Cycle Toronto, where they are going to be examining Cycling 101. And on the 26th of April, we are going to be having kitchen table conversation with ACAI. Now, for the month of May, May 3rd, May 10th, and the 17th of May, we are going to be focusing on bike repair sessions, and the central focus is on transportation, because at the end of the day, the mode of transport, the type of transportation system that we have, it in of itself has some implication for climate change, climate mitigation. And so therefore we want to ensure that persons are educated along the line of climate education. And so we are of the view that this will also help. And so I really want to thank you for coming out today. And with a long weekend, I'm here in Jamaica. We are having a lockdown for the weekend, you know, and so therefore we are technically locked in as a result of the COVID challenge. But nevertheless, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the team from Akai as well, you know, Katie, Sarah, Kwame. How could I leave out you, Kwame? Because you would have done such a wonderful presentation in terms of what's happening there at the Redfield Women's Center, and so all of my other colleagues, as well as the guests and presenters. So thank you very much, and have yourself a wonderful day. It's 12:45 here in Jamaica. I know it's probably 1:45 there, Katie, and probably in England, I think it's what 6:45. I might be wrong. Yeah, so take care and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.